When Sarah and I first drove through the elegant stone entrance of Oakwood Estates, it felt like crossing a threshold into the life we had always dreamed about. The lawns were immaculate squares of emerald green. The houses stood tall and pristine with their matching slate roofs and tasteful landscaping. After 7 years of marriage, countless overtime shifts, and finally landing my promotion at the architectural firm, we had saved enough for the down payment on our first real home. A place worthy of the baby girl growing in Sarah's belly. The real estate agent had mentioned the homeowners association briefly during the closing, sliding a thick binder across the table with a casual, standard stuff, nothing to worry about. I remembered flipping through pages of bylaws about exterior paint colors and lawn maintenance schedules, but nothing seemed unreasonable. We were too enchanted by the neighborhood's perfect streets and the promise of security to ask deeper questions. 3 days after moving in, the doorbell rang. A woman stood on our porch, her silver hair pulled into a severe bun, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. She wore a navy blue blazer with a small gold pin that read President affixed to the lapel. "Welcome to Oakwood Estates. I am Rhonda Hale, president of the Community Association." She extended a manicured hand, her grip unnecessarily firm. "I wanted to personally deliver your welcome package and review a few expectations." Sarah invited her in for coffee, and for 40 minutes, Rhonda detailed the community guidelines with the precision of a military general explaining battle tactics. No trash cans visible from the street. No vehicles parked in driveways overnight. No exterior modifications without written approval. No holiday decorations outside prescribed dates. The list continued, her voice growing increasingly stern with each rule. "We pride ourselves on maintaining certain standards here," she said, sliding an updated rulebook across our kitchen counter. "Not everyone understands the value of strict compliance, but you seem like intelligent people." She leaned forward slightly. "Just remember, my word as president is final in matters of interpretation. It keeps things orderly." As she left, I noticed a black SUV with tinted windows slowly circling the cul-de-sac. The vehicle bore no official markings, except for a small insignia on the door that matched the pin on Rhonda's blazer. "Did that seem a little intense to you?" I asked Sarah after closing the door. She rubbed her pregnant belly nervously. "Maybe they are just serious about keeping property values high. That is good for us in the long run, right?" I wanted to believe that, but something about Rhonda's cold eyes and practiced smile left me unsettled. The first notice arrived exactly 1 week later, a formal letter in a sealed envelope, citing us for improper mailbox height and demanding compliance within 72 hours or a $50 fine would be assessed. I measured our mailbox. It was exactly 42 inches from the ground, precisely as specified in the guidelines. When I called the HOA office to challenge the citation, the secretary informed me that President Hale had recently amended the height requirement to 44 inches. The change was not yet reflected in the printed materials, but was effective immediately. More notices followed. Our garden hose was improperly coiled. Our garbage bin was visible from alternate street angles. Our window treatments were inconsistent with community aesthetic standards. Each infraction seemed more arbitrary than the last. Each came with escalating fines. One evening, while painting our nursery, I noticed James, our neighbor across the street, cautiously approaching our house, constantly glancing over his shoulder. "I just wanted to warn you," he whispered on our porch, refusing to come inside. "Do not make waves with Rhonda. Last family that challenged her ended up with so many violations they had to sell at a loss." "But these citations are completely made up," I protested. James looked nervously at the black SUV that had appeared at the corner. Those guys in the security vehicles. They are not just watching for outsiders. They report everything back to her. Trust me, just pay the fines and keep your head down. As he hurried back across the street, the SUV slowly rolled past our house. The driver stared directly at me through the tinted window, not even pretending to be on a regular patrol. I closed our curtains, suddenly feeling exposed in my own home. The dream house was starting to feel like a prison, with watchtowers and guards included. The morning sickness had finally subsided for Sarah, and the second trimester was supposed to be the easier one. Instead, I found her crying at the kitchen table, clutching another HOA notice. $800, she whispered, her voice breaking. They say our mailbox paint is sandstone beige instead of desert beige, and they are fining us retroactively for each day since installation. I took the letter from her trembling hands. The description cited Violation 23.7b regarding unapproved color deviation exceeding 7% from standard palette. It was signed not by Rhonda, but by someone identified only as Compliance Officer 3. "This is ridiculous," I said, crumpling the paper. "They cannot tell the difference between two nearly identical beiges. No reasonable person could." Sarah wiped her eyes. "I called my father for a loan. He says we should just pay it and repaint. Fighting could make things worse." That evening, I repainted our mailbox in the exact shade from their approved list, purchased directly from their recommended vendor at 4 times the normal retail price. As I finished, one of the black SUVs slowed in front of our house. The window lowered, revealing a man in a dark uniform with an embroidered patch reading Oakwood Enforcement. He was not a police officer. He was not wearing any official law enforcement identification. Yet he had a tactical belt and what appeared to be a holstered weapon. "New mailbox color been approved yet?" he asked, his voice carrying an unmistakable threat. "Just finished painting it," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Official desert beige from the approved vendor." He made a show of taking notes on a tablet. "We will assess compliance in the morning. Make sure your lawn is cut to exactly 2.5 inches before inspection." The following week, I attempted to attend the monthly HOA meeting listed in the community newsletter. I arrived at the clubhouse 5 minutes early, only to find the doors locked. Through the windows, I could see Rhonda and about 12 other residents already seated inside. When I knocked, a man I recognized as one of the enforcement officers opened the door just wide enough to speak. "Private meeting, invitation only." "But the newsletter said all residents are welcome," I objected. Meeting time was changed. Notice was sent electronically. No such notice had ever arrived in my inbox. When I checked my spam folder later that night, there was indeed an email sent just 30 minutes before the meeting, regretfully informing residents of a schedule change. The next day, Linda from 2 doors down approached me while I was retrieving our mail. She was in her 60s, had lived in the neighborhood for over a decade, and spoke in a perpetual whisper. "I saw you try to attend the meeting," she said, looking around nervously. "Rhonda does not allow new residents until they have shown proper commitment to community standards." "Who are these security people?" I asked. "They act like they have actual authority." Linda's face tightened. "They are not real officers. Rhonda's son runs a private security company. She convinced the board years ago to contract exclusively with them. They have no real jurisdiction, but nobody challenges them. People who do find themselves targeted." That night, while Sarah was at her prenatal yoga class, I heard footsteps in our backyard. I looked out to see one of the officers walking the perimeter of our property, shining a flashlight into our windows. When I opened the back door to confront him, he barely acknowledged my presence. "Standard security sweep," he stated flatly. "Resident compliance check." "You cannot just enter private property without permission," I said. "This is trespassing." He turned, his hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. HOA Bylaws Section 47.3 authorizes perimeter inspection. You signed the agreement. After he left, I called the actual police. The officer who responded seemed uncomfortable when I explained the situation. "Look," he said quietly, "we have had calls about this HOA before. But technically, if you signed their covenant and it includes security inspections, our hands are tied. It is a civil matter, not criminal." He hesitated before adding, "Just between us, I would never buy in this neighborhood. These HOA people, they are not right." That night, I lay awake beside Sarah, listening to the occasional sound of SUVs circling our block like sharks. This was not just pettiness or power tripping. This was systematic intimidation, and we were trapped by a mortgage we could not afford to walk away from. When my twin brothers, Marcus and Michael, pulled into our driveway in their mud-spattered pickup truck, it felt like the cavalry had arrived. I had called them 3 days earlier, trying to sound casual about needing help setting up the nursery before the baby came. But they knew me too well. They heard the tension in my voice and decided to come 2 weeks earlier than planned. Marcus and Michael were identical in appearance but opposite in temperament. Both had served as Navy SEALs for 12 years before moving into private security consulting. Marcus was analytical and patient. Michael was intuitive and reactive. Together, they had survived 3 tours in conflict zones that they rarely discussed. They had seen the worst of humanity and come back stronger. "Nice neighborhood," Marcus observed as they unloaded their duffel bags. "Very uniform." "Too uniform," Michael added, his eyes already scanning the surroundings with professional assessment. "And what is with the vehicle circling the block? Third pass in 15 minutes. I had not even noticed the black SUV making another round. But nothing escaped their notice. It never had, even when we were children. Sarah embraced them both, her 7-month pregnant belly making the hugs somewhat awkward but no less genuine. "Thank goodness you are here. Maybe now James can stop obsessing over mailbox colors and start assembling the crib." Over dinner, I tried to downplay the HOA situation, but my brothers exchanged knowing glances as I recounted the escalating fines and strange security presence. "So these guys carry weapons?" Marcus asked, his tone deliberately casual. "They wear tactical gear and have holsters," I confirmed. "I have never actually seen them draw a gun, but the implication is clear." Michael set down his fork, "And they enter your property without permission. They call it perimeter inspection. The HOA contract apparently allows it." Marcus pulled out his phone and began typing. "I would like to see the exact wording of that clause." The next morning, while I was at work, Michael called. "You need to come home, now." When I arrived, my brothers were standing in our driveway with grim expressions. Marcus pointed across the street where a man was sitting in a parked car, not bothering to hide the binoculars directed at our house. "He has been there for 3 hours, Michael said quietly, "taking notes, photographing everyone who enters or exits, not even trying to be subtle about it." "Could he be actual law enforcement?" I asked. Marcus shook his head. "No, law enforcement would identify themselves if questioned, which I did. This guy claimed to be community safety, but refused to provide credentials." That afternoon, My brothers installed their own security cameras at key points around our property's small, nearly invisible devices that fed to a secure cloud server. They added motion sensors at entry points and conducted what they called a vulnerability assessment of our home. "Your locks are decent," Marcus concluded, "but your doors would not withstand a determined entry attempt. The windows on the ground floor need additional security measures." When Rhonda Hale appeared at our door that evening, my brothers answered. I watched from the kitchen as she attempted to intimidate them with her usual tactics. "I do not believe we have been introduced," she said coldly. "Guests must be registered with the HOA for stays exceeding 48 hours." Marcus smiled pleasantly. "We are family, not guests, and we will be staying until our niece is born and settled." "There are rules about extended occupancy," Rhonda insisted. "Capacity limitations per square footage. You might want to check state law on family visitation rights versus HOA restrictions," Michael suggested. "Courts have repeatedly ruled in favor of immediate family members." Rhonda's composure slipped momentarily, her eyes narrowing. "You are both guests here, with no standing in association matters." "We are simply helping our brother prepare for his daughter's arrival," Marcus replied, his voice remaining calm and measured. "Nothing in your bylaws prevents that." After she left, visibly flustered, Michael turned to me. "She is used to intimidating people who do not know their rights. This is not about community standards. This is about control." That night, we discovered all 4 tires on my car had been slashed in our driveway. The HOA enforcement vehicle drove by slowly as we inspected the damage, the driver making no effort to investigate the vandalism occurring within his supposed jurisdiction. "Coincidence?" Sarah asked fearfully. Marcus placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "There are no coincidences in situations like this, only messages." By midnight, my brothers had installed additional cameras covering every angle of our property, including our vehicles. They took shifts through the night, watching and waiting with the patience of men who had conducted surveillance in far more dangerous environments than a suburban cul-de-sac. "We have been in neighborhoods under warlord control that felt less oppressive than this," Michael observed as dawn broke. "At least there, the enemy was honest about who they were." Midnight. The digital clock beside our bed cast a red glow across the darkness when the pounding began. Thunderous, deliberate blows against our front door, followed by shouting that cut through the silence of our home. "HOA compliance, open up now, emergency inspection." Sarah bolted upright beside me, clutching her pregnant belly protectively. "James, what is happening?" I was already reaching for my phone. "Stay here, lock the bedroom door behind me." The hallway was dark as I moved toward the commotion, adrenaline clearing away the fog of interrupted sleep. Our doorbell was now ringing in continuous, aggressive bursts. "HOA compliance unit, open immediately or we will enter by force." I reached the entryway just as the first splintering crack of wood giving way echoed through our home. The door burst inward with violent force. 3 figures rushed inside, dressed in black tactical gear with masks covering their faces. They carried flashlights mounted on what appeared to be actual firearms, the beams blinding me as they swept the room. "On the ground, now," the leader barked the command, weapon aimed directly at my chest. I raised my hands instinctively. "This is my house. You cannot just break in." Section 12.4 gives us authority during compliance emergencies, another intruder shouted, advancing toward me. "Multiple violations have been reported." Behind me, I heard Sarah scream, and a surge of protective rage cut through my fear. "Get out of my house. My wife is pregnant." Final warning. The leader took another step forward, his weapon steady. "On the ground, or we will use necessary force to secure compliance." It happened so fast I barely registered the sequence of events. Two shadows descended the stairs with preternatural silence. Marcus appeared behind the first intruder, disarming him with a single fluid motion that ended with the man face down on our living room floor, arm twisted at an unnatural angle. Michael simultaneously engaged the second man, executing a controlled takedown that left the intruder gasping for breath, weapon skittering across our hardwood floor. The leader swung his weapon toward this new threat, but Marcus was already moving. A precise strike to the wrist, followed by a sweep of the legs, and the self-proclaimed compliance officer joined his colleague on the ground. Michael secured the fallen weapons with practiced efficiency, clearing each and securing them in a matter of seconds. The third intruder bolted for the door, but in his panic, collided with an end table. A badge clattered to the floor as he stumbled outside into the night. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 30 seconds. "Police are on their way," Michael announced calmly, phone in hand as he kept the two subdued men covered. Marcus was already checking the fallen badge. "Private Protection Agent," he read aloud, his voice thick with disgust. "Oakwood Community Enforcement Division. This is not a law enforcement credential." The men on our floor had gone completely still, the fight draining from them as they realized their tactical advantage had evaporated. With their masks now pulled away, they looked surprisingly ordinary, one middle-aged with a receding hairline, the other barely out of his 20s. Sarah appeared at the top of the stairs, clutching the banister for support. "Are you okay?" Her voice trembled, but her eyes blazed with a mixture of fear and fury. "We are fine," I assured her, my own hands shaking with residual adrenaline. "These men are not going anywhere." When the actual police arrived, 4 patrol cars with genuine lights and actual officers, the scene in our living room required extensive explanation. The HOA officers now claimed they had received reports of a disturbance and were conducting a welfare check. With masks and weapons drawn, the police sergeant asked skeptically, "Standard procedure for unknown threat environments," the older intruder insisted. "And you identified yourselves as HOA compliance, not as law enforcement." The sergeant was taking careful notes. "We never claimed to be police," the younger one said defensively. As the real officers led the men outside, Rhonda Hale appeared on our lawn in a silk bathrobe, performing outrage with theatrical precision. "This is a terrible misunderstanding," she announced to the gathering neighbors. "These men are volunteers with our Community Watch program. They must have exceeded their authority due to overzealousness." The police sergeant looked skeptically between Rhonda and the handcuffed men. "Ma'am, breaking and entering with weapons is not overzealousness. It is a felony, and impersonating law enforcement carries additional charges." "They never claimed to be police officers," she insisted. "Only HOA compliance." "Compliance does not authorize armed home invasion," the sergeant replied firmly. "Everyone involved will need to provide statements down at the station." As the patrol cars departed with our intruders, Marcus placed a hand on my shoulder. "This was not random. This was targeted intimidation that went wrong." "Because they did not expect you to be here," I realized aloud. Michael nodded grimly. "They expected defenseless targets. They found something else entirely." Dawn broke over our violated home. The splintered front door had been temporarily secured with boards, but the sense of safety we had once felt was irreparably damaged. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, hands protectively cradling her belly, as my brothers and I began our investigation. "We need to understand what we are dealing with," Marcus said, laptop open before him. "This goes beyond HOA overreach. This is organized intimidation." Michael spread out the items recovered from the intruders on the table. Fake badges, copies of HOA bylaws with handwritten notations, and an earpiece communication device. "These guys were coordinated," he observed. "That suggests structure, hierarchy, and most importantly, money. Someone is funding this operation." The badge found during the break-in bore the name Oakwood Community Enforcement, with a business license number. Marcus traced it to a limited liability company called Community Protection Services, registered in Wyoming, a state notorious for corporate privacy. "Look at this," he said, turning the screen toward us. "The registered agent is listed as Robert Hale, any relation to your HOA president." "Could be her husband," I suggested, "or maybe a son or brother." Michael was already on his phone. "I have a contact in corporate security who can run deeper background. We need to know who we are dealing with." By midday, we had our answer. Community Protection Services was owned by Rhonda's cousin, a former police officer who had lost his badge after multiple excessive force complaints. The company operated in 3 states, exclusively contracting with homeowners associations. "This is their business model," Marcus concluded. "They take over HOAs, install their people as officers, then hire their own security company to enforce made-up rules. The fines go to the HOA, which then pays the security company for enforcement services. It is a perfect closed loop of profit and power." As word of the break-in spread through the neighborhood, something unexpected happened. Neighbors began to appear at our door, quietly, cautiously, but with determination in their eyes. Linda from down the street brought financial records showing unexplained special assessments dating back 3 years. James from across the way had saved every citation he had received, revealing a pattern of escalating fines that always seemed to peak when major maintenance projects were announced. The most valuable information came from George, who had served as HOA treasurer before being abruptly removed from the board. He arrived with a flash drive containing hundreds of emails. "I kept copies of everything," he explained in a hushed tone, glancing nervously at the window. "They made me sign a non-disclosure agreement when they forced me out, but after what happened to you folks." The emails revealed the extent of the scheme. Explicit instructions from Rhonda directing the enforcement officers to target specific households. Lists of fabricated violations to cite if homes appeared too well-maintained to find actual infractions. Notes identifying which residents were compliance risks versus reliable revenue sources. Most damning were the financial records showing hundreds of thousands of dollars flowing from the HOA to Community Protection Services, far exceeding the amounts disclosed in official budgets presented to residents. "This is not just unethical, it is criminal," Marcus stated flatly. "Fraud, intimidation, conspiracy, and last night, armed breaking and entering." We compiled everything into organized files. Financial records, testimony from neighbors, photographs of our damaged property, medical documentation of Sarah's pregnancy-related stress symptoms, and records of every interaction with the HOA and their enforcement team. When we were ready, Michael contacted a former military colleague now working with the state attorney general's office. Within hours, we received confirmation that our case had been assigned to a special investigator focused on organized financial crimes. That evening, a letter arrived by certified mail. It bore the HOA letterhead but was signed by Rhonda personally. The language was carefully constructed legalese threatening severe consequences for defamation and breach of community covenants. It demanded we cease all unauthorized investigations or face maximum penalties under association bylaws. The threat only confirmed what we already knew. We had them running scared. The morning news vans arrived just as the state investigators' unmarked vehicles pulled into our cul-de-sac. For 3 years, Rhonda Hale and her private security force had operated in shadows, but today, everything would be exposed to harsh daylight. We watched from our front porch as officers in windbreakers emblazoned with State Financial Crimes Task Force entered the HOA office with cardboard boxes and digital forensic equipment. Neighbors emerged from their homes, first tentatively, then with growing confidence as they realized what was happening. The lead investigator, a methodical woman named Agent Ramirez, had contacted us early that morning. "We have been building cases against similar operations in 2 other counties," she had explained. "Your evidence was the missing piece that connected them all." Rhonda arrived at the office an hour into the search, her usual composed demeanor cracking as she saw the official vehicles. She demanded to see warrants, insisted on calling attorneys, and finally resorted to attempting to block the removal of computer equipment. When that failed, she retreated to her black SUV, only to find state troopers waiting with additional paperwork. By noon, the story had broken across local television. "HOA fraud ring exposed," scrolled across the bottom of screens as reporters delivered breathless updates. "Armed private security impersonating law enforcement," read another headline. The most damning revelation came when one of the men who had broken into our home agreed to cooperate with investigators. In exchange for reduced charges, he provided a complete account of the operation, how residents were systematically targeted, how the security team was instructed to escalate intimidation tactics against anyone who questioned authority, and how the entire operation funneled money back to Rhonda and her family members. "We were told it was all legally authorized," he claimed on camera, his face partially obscured. "The residents had signed agreements allowing enforcement, but breaking into homes with weapons drawn, that was crossing a line I never should have agreed to." By mid-afternoon, what began as shock had transformed into community catharsis. Neighbors who had lived in fear for years emerged to share their stories with each other. The isolation that had allowed Rhonda's regime to flourish was collapsing in a wave of shared outrage and relief. Someone brought folding tables to the community park. Another family arrived with coolers of drinks. Without planning or permission forms, an impromptu gathering formed the first genuinely neighborly event many could remember. As twilight approached, Agent Ramirez returned to give us an update. "Rhonda Hale has been taken into custody on multiple charges: conspiracy to commit fraud, impersonation of law enforcement, extortion, and as an accessory to home invasion. Her cousin and son have also been arrested in connection with the security company." The weight that had pressed upon our lives for months finally lifted. Sarah laughed for the first time in weeks, the joy bringing color back to her face. As neighbors continued to gather in growing numbers in the park across from our home, Sarah suddenly gripped my hand, her expression shifting from happiness to surprise. "James," she whispered, placing my palm against her belly, "I think it is happening. I think the baby is coming." Marcus already had the hospital bag in hand before I could even process the words. Michael was clearing a path to the car. Our neighbors parted to let us through, offering encouragement and support as Sarah carefully made her way down our front steps. 16 hours later, As the first light of a new day filtered through hospital blinds, our daughter Lily entered the world 7 pounds, 3 ounces of perfect, peaceful promise. As I held her tiny form against my chest, the nightmare of the previous month seemed to recede, replaced by something stronger than fear had ever been. We had not just protected our home, we had reclaimed our community. 6 months after Rhonda's arrest, spring bloomed across Oakwood Estates with a vibrancy that matched the neighborhood's renewed spirit. The grass seemed greener, the flowers more brilliant, as if nature itself celebrated our liberation. The county court had appointed a receiver to manage the HOA until residents could elect new leadership. Their first act was to eliminate all fines levied under the previous administration. Their second was to reduce monthly dues by 60%, revealing just how inflated the association fees had been. Many assumed we would sell our house as soon as possible, move away from the painful memories, and start fresh elsewhere. Several families had already listed their homes, eager to escape the shadow of what the media now called the HOA tyranny case. A real estate agent presented us with an offer significantly above market value. "A lot of people find your story compelling," she explained. "There is something appealing about buying a home with such a powerful history of standing up against corruption." Sarah and I discussed it late into the night, weighing options as Lily slept peacefully in her nursery, the room that had once been my greatest worry, now my greatest joy. "We could start over somewhere new," I suggested. "No memories of broken doors or armed intruders." Sarah looked out our bedroom window at the neighborhood where porch lights now stayed on in welcome rather than surveillance. "Or we could stay and help build something better," she countered. "Running away feels like letting them win, even now." The decision crystallized the next morning when Linda knocked on our door, a petition in hand. "We are nominating you for the new HOA board," she announced. "We need people who understand the difference between rules that protect and rules that control." That afternoon, I stood in our front yard with a small maple sapling, Lily secured in a carrier on my chest. Neighbors gathered to watch as I dug the hole, explaining the symbolism as I worked. "This tree will grow as our daughter grows," I told them. "It will put down roots just as we are choosing to do. Its branches will provide shade for all who pass by, not just those who conform to arbitrary standards." As the first-year anniversary of our confrontation approached, the newly elected HOA board unveiled a small bronze plaque in the community park. It read simply, "In recognition of those who stood against injustice and restored this community to its residents, may we always remember that true security comes not from control but from connection." My brothers returned for Lily's first birthday celebration. They had kept in touch regularly, but seeing them in person again brought back the intensity of those days when their presence had changed everything. "The neighborhood looks different," Marcus observed, as we walked the streets that had once felt like prison corridors. "People actually wave to each other now." Michael nodded in agreement, and not a single black SUV in sight. Before they departed, my brothers spent a week training interested residents in creating a genuine neighborhood watch program, one based on community connection rather than intimidation. The irony was not lost on any of us that the same tactics once used to control were now being used to protect. On their final evening, as we sat on our back porch watching Lily attempt her first steps between Sarah's outstretched arms, Marcus raised his glass in a toast. "To standing your ground," he said, "even when it would be easier to retreat." Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I stood alone in our front yard, looking at our home with new eyes. The door had been repaired, stronger than before. The windows now opened to let in fresh air rather than being sealed against watchful eyes. The maple sapling had already grown several inches, reaching toward the sky with the same determination that had carried us through the darkest days. This house was more than wood and stone and mortgage payments. It was a testimony to what people can accomplish when they refuse to be intimidated, when they fight not just for themselves, but for everyone who has ever lived in fear of those who abuse power. Home is not just a place you live, it is a place worth fighting for.